ratio, including the Cyprus, Belgium, and Greece, as well as Spain, Italy, and Portugal, where it's kind of about between 40 and 80 and above 80. So what is being done and what is needed in Europe to really improve the water supply? So what, as we've mentioned already, the average share of public water supply in total water abstraction is about 1/4, 24%. But the sector is contributing 129 billion euros in terms of the gross value added, and about 1% in terms of the employment. Around 45 billion euros are invested each year in the EU by water services providers, which equate to about 82 euros per person per year. But when we look in the future, the OECD assesses that a total of 255 billion euros will be required by 2030 to comply, both to ensure compliance with Drinking Water Directive and Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and to enhance the efficiency of water supply systems. As we can see from the chart, the relative contributions, unsurprisingly, are quite varied depending on the country, ranging from about 0.3 billion euros in Malta to about 40 billion euros by Germany. And in terms of in relative terms, per capita terms, countries would need to spend between 500 and 1,000 euros more per person by 2030 to ensure both the ongoing compliance, but also to improve the state of the public water supply and sewerage. So, looking then at the four priority sectors that the study assessed. The first one being semiconductors, and at the moment the EU is accounting for about 10% of the global market and projected to grow annually by 6 to 8% by 2030. In terms of the GDP, the sector accounts for about 0.4% of EU GDP. It has a production capacity of around 30 million wafers per month, and it enables the production of around 250 million iPhone 13s in relative terms. And generally, EU has strong capabilities in research and development and equipment manufacturing. The EU Chip Act, however, sets a goal of achieving a global market share of 20% by 2030, and that would require producing 6 million wafers per month, and it will necessitate an improvement in water productivity to be able to achieve the EU goal, because the production is quite water intensive. So in the assessment shows that improving the water productivity will result in about 20% reduction in freshwater use compared to the current efficiency level, which is about 21 liters per centimeter square of wafer. And the future growth in production would require investment in water recycling technologies, because current recycling rates vary from about 45 to 86%. So looking at the charts and looking at the different the dotted lines, so the blue line indicates that the current efficiency levels are retained, and as the capacity is growing to achieve the EU Chips Act objectives, the water consumption is growing substantially. But if improved water efficiency measures are implemented, that allows to have a much lower increase in the water use. And similarly, there is a relationship in terms of the wastewater discharge. So the investments in the tailored and innovative water management programs for production sites are essential to tackle the key challenges in the industry, and these are the need for the ultra-pure water. So that requires both the substantial freshwater resources and substantial levels of treatment. achieving the EU goals to scale up the production will lead to more water intensive practices, but those need to be counteracted by efficiency measures. So that is one of the challenges. There is a relatively low water purification rate and pretreatment efficiency, and the current industry clusters pose a risk to water quality in those particular areas. So in terms of the investment needs, the types of the investments would be needed in advanced water purification technology, in closed-loop system in the fabrication process, and advanced wastewater treatment facilities like membrane distillation to avoid harmful wastewater discharge. So implementing those technologies would be required with a certain capital and operational costs, but on the benefit side, it will bring both the water savings and operational cost savings in some instances, for instance, through the lower energy consumption. And it will also have a wider economic benefit in terms of the competitiveness, impacts on the sectoral growth, the GVA, and the employment. So the assessment and the analysis done suggest that the efficient production and use of ultra-pure water by 2030, the EU semiconductor industry could save around 756 million in using the reclaimed ultra-pure water, and a further 260 million in operational cost savings by advanced purification technologies. Also, one of the innovative case study technologies using industrial waste heat from the production to actually power the wastewater treatment could potentially save around 125 million annually per year by 2030. In terms of the data management, that is also one of the very fast growing sector, which is currently expected to grow at a combined annual growth rate of 8% between 2024 and 2029, to reach an installed capacity of just below 18,000 megawatts by 2029, up from 12,000 currently. So the projected value of the sector to the EU economy is about 4.9% of the total GDP, or 660 billion euros, and it employs about 4% of the current EU total employment. The location of the sector is very much concentrated in the so-called FLAP-D region, so that includes Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin, where 36, so 1/3 of the total EU capacity is located. And it's very much dominated by co-location and large hyperscale operators. The Climate Neutral Data Center Pact proposed to cut water usage to 3.5 million liters for 1 megawatt per year. And that would be a reduction, almost as an order of magnitude from the current 26 million liters per 1 megawatt per year, and reducing the water consumption at the moment by the EU data centers is about 60 million cubic meters per year, of which a significant proportion is the cooling. But EU data centers, to reach that increased capacity, would need up to 90 million cubic meters of water per year. However, to offset that, if the investment in the innovative cooling technologies is made, it can then decline to 23 million cubic meters per year. So depending on the replacement of the water cooling with alternative cooling technologies would really help reducing the water consumption by the sector. So in terms of the challenges, it is very much the issue that the high growth in data centers in the EU will increase demand for water for cooling if water-based cooling technology is used. It is the specific location of the data center capacity is already located in some of the areas of the EU that are water stress. And the data centers mainly use potable water quality. So improving and investing in innovative cooling technologies, as well as in the circular water use infrastructure, will be essential to avoid rapid increase in water use, particularly in the next 5 years. So in terms of the investment needs, it's very much about improved cooling technologies, but also being smart about the location of where the data centers are located in the EU. The benefits of investing in those in such measures would be very much associated with the water savings and associated potential cost savings due to reduced freshwater abstraction, and would lead to the impact on the sectoral employment and the wider economic benefits. So a complete switch from water-intensive cooling to more innovative technologies would result in an estimated 260 million euros saving per year. And in the case of switching to the immersive liquid cooling, the cost savings would be higher at estimated 328 million per year. The next sector is renewables, so hydrogen production, which is an immensely important sector for European Union, and it has set a target to achieve 10 million tons of hydrogen produced in the EU per year by 2030, and that would require a growth rate of 176% per annum to actually achieve that. At the moment, EU invested about 70 billion in hydrogen projects up to 2023. There are 476 operational production facilities, and EU consumes about just below the 10 million tons of hydrogen per year, but it's mostly the grey hydrogen. And only 0.2% of hydrogen produced in the EU is green, so produced from the renewable energy. And achieving the strategic EU hydrogen production goal by 2030 will be quite challenging, and it will increase the future water demand unless electrolysis efficiency improvement measures are prioritized and implemented. When we're talking about water, it is primary resource in hydrogen production, both in terms of the use by electrolysis, but also use as a coolant. The water productivity differs depending on the on water sources, on raw water sources, ranging from about 10 liters to 28 liters per 1 kilogram of green hydrogen. And future EU targets to scale up to 10 million tons per year unless mitigation and efficiency measures are introduced would result in high increases in water withdrawal and wastewater discharge. And here are some estimates, again, with scenarios depending on the improved efficiency in the electrolysis production processes. Challenges, so it is a very water-intensive sector, so it may raise, depending on the location, issue of water scarcity or competing with other sectors. The low efficiency of the electrolysis leads to higher production costs than in other regions, and water impurities affect the plant's lifetime as well as degradation. So what can be done and what are the types of the investment needs that can be implemented is the better water purification technology, use of the seawater as an alternative of fresh water, and alternative cooling methods such as air cooling systems. So the study estimated that investing approximately 236 million to 252 million in direct seawater electrolysis would save up to 352 million of water withdrawal costs. Using the alternative cooling systems, such as air-fin coolers, would save around 258 million cubic meters of water, equating to 903 million in cost savings, it would also prevent a loss of at least 190 million cubic meters through evaporation. And finally, the most effective approach would be combination of water treatment technology measures and management approaches to increase the efficiency, and that maximization would result in the expected benefits, a total expected benefits of 1.224 billion in the sector. Electric batteries, another important sector that we've looked at, and the energy storage technologies are expected to have significant market growth, particularly due to the EU Net Zero Industry Act, and it is aiming for the 90% of the EU annual battery demand to be supplied by EU manufacturers by 2030. The market size for EV batteries and fuel cells is around 38 billion and 2.3 billion respectively. A total fleet of 5,570 fuel cell EV in the EU, of which 86% are passenger cars. 45 to 95 of battery gigafactories would be needed by 2040 to actually support the demand for electric vehicle batteries. And between 360 and 750 gigawatt hours per year of fuel cells will be needed by 2030. EV battery production is very intensive, water-intensive process, and the growth that would be needed to produce that amount, that share of the total battery demand in the EU locally would increase the demand for water significantly, because it's essential for different stages of the process, including cooling, cleaning, chemical reactions. And on average, about 0.2 million cubic meters of water is required for every gigawatt hour of the output. And without any water productivity improvements, EU would require at least 26 million of extra water by 2030, or 56 by 2040. But like with the other sectors, if the productivity efficiency measures are introduced, that future water consumption can be reduced. It still is going to be higher than currently, but it will be much lower than otherwise if no efficiency measures are introduced. So the similar challenges are facing the EV battery sector in terms of competition and lack of water resources, the particular issue of battery gigafactory locations falling within water stress areas, and quite contaminated wastewater discharge from this type of the production. So in terms of the investment needs, it would be very much around the measures to improve freshwater purification filtration, introducing closed-loop systems in the gigafactories, alternative cooling methods, and advanced wastewater treatment technology. And the study estimated that investing around 59 million per year in air cooling systems by 2040 could save about 66 million cubic meters of water, equating to 230 millions in cost savings, and also just below 50 million cubic meters of water loss avoided through evaporation. One could also reuse industrial waste heat that is generated by these types of the production, and that could potentially save about 42 million of operational costs annually by 2040. And finally, combining the technological improvements and governance and management approaches would result in 269 million savings for the EV battery production sector. And finally, the last priority sector that the study looked at was agriculture and food production, which is an important sector despite having a relatively small share in the EU GDP, 1.4%. It is important in terms of the jobs, accounting for 4.2% of total, as well as, most importantly, food security and communities and cultural identity. The projected value of the sector by 2035 is 527 billion euros, with a 1.2% growth per year from 2025. It is concentrated in countries when we are looking at the distribution in absolute terms. France, Germany, Italy, and Spain account for the biggest agricultural sectors, but the relative share of agricultural value added in GDP is relatively greater in countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and lower in Malta and Luxembourg. And the first two stages of agricultural and food processing are the most of the food chain, are the most water intensive. The water used by abstraction by agricultural sector could be as high as 60 billion per year by 2030, but with introduced efficiencies in irrigation practices, it would alternatively be 52 billion cubic meters. It is the second largest water abstractor in the EU, with 28% of total on average, but lower than global average. For the food processing sector in particular, we've looked at a couple of specific examples in terms of the cheese production and beer manufacturing, and these are quite substantive users of water within that total. And depending on the efficiency, so these are the kind of the ranges between the 60 and 53 billion cubic meters, depending on the implementation of water efficiency measures. The challenges that sector is facing is the high water. It is a high water usage sector, and some of the agricultural production is located in the countries that are experiencing severe water stress. And the food, which is very important, the food processing needs very high quality potable water. So in terms of the measures, what is needed is more efficient irrigation practices, the wastewater treatment and use of the reclaimed, reused wastewater, increased wastewater reused. In some areas, desalination and supply of desalinated water would also improve the water availability and result in some direct and wider benefits. So depending on the different alternatives in terms of the efficient irrigation, the supply, the use of the reused wastewater, desalination, it would, depending on the scenario and depending on the measure, it would range from kind of a net negative, so additional cost but at the same time, indeed, saving fresh water, to a net positive options like improved irrigation and increased use of wastewater, treated wastewater. So to conclude, overall, significant investments are being made and are needed in both the public water supply and sewage sector. So the estimated 255 billion. But it's also very important in the individual sectors, because the water is crucial for these high value and high growth industries. The combined market worth of semiconductors, renewable hydrogen, and EV battery sectors is currently 172 billion as an estimate, and it's forecasted to grow by 2030 to 1 trillion euros. But at the same time, that growth would require 1.8 billion cubic meters of water, which is almost 2.6 times higher than the current water demand by these industries. At the same time, adopting innovative water-saving technologies will save about 3 billion in euros and would result in creation of 13,500 jobs and additional 606 million of GVA per year. And in order to manage the growth by semiconductors, renewable hydrogen, battery sectors, and really achieve the strategic priorities and the goals set in the EU Chips Act, the renewable strategy, it really needs to happen in a sustainable manner while ensuring the net zero transition, energy security, and water efficiency. On that, I conclude my very kind of a brief but compact and overview of the report that Dirk indeed referred to. It's more than 300 pages of very dense material. So I've tried to do my best in trying to condense all of it in 20 minutes. So let me stop sharing my screen so I can go back and see.
Okay, thank you very much, Ilona. I think that was a great effort to summarize that extensive study in 20 minutes. I think you did a great job there in doing that. With that, I thank you very much, and then we continue to the panel discussion. Any questions will be after the opportunity for questions will be after the panel discussion. Yeah, where we'll take together any questions you may have both on the presentation and on the panel discussion. So with that, Tanya, I would like to give you the floor and please introduce your panel.
Thank you so much, Dirk, and welcome everyone and to our panelists. So today we have David Martin, who is the Executive Director at Air Products, and he has a very extensive experience in the water sector at Nauco and Ecolab across Europe. We have Lucas Boutillon, who is the Head of EU Government Affairs at Soitec, and Lucas has had also previous roles with Iliad and Scaleway. And we have Amanda Bjorksel, who is the chairperson of Copa Cogeca, Working Party on the Environment, and also works as a sustainability policy advisor at the Federation of Swedish Farmers. As Dirk said, we will start now with a panel, and please put your questions in the chat function of Zoom so we can assess and see how many questions we have and what we can manage to answer during this panel, or they will be answered then later on after the panel. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our panelists, and I will start with a question to all of you, and it's the same question, to please introduce your company or organization and give your first reaction to the figures that you've seen from this presentation that Ilona gave for the impact on your sector. David, I'll start with you.
Yes, hi, thank you, Ilona. So I'm David Martin. I work for Air Products. Air Products is an industrial gas company, so we sell gas from the air. But we are as well the leaders in hydrogen production for the last 60 years globally. So we are an American-based company, and we are present in Europe for nearly 100 years. And so clearly our solutions are centered around decarbonization either through clean fuels, through efficiency increase, or demand reduction. And I'm going to be centering a little bit more my comments on the hydrogen element, because this was one of the points that was covered in this report. But my initial reaction is actually first, great to actually continue to promote, illustrate, explain how water is not just an issue for the water industry, but how much water is critical for all the other industries, notably the one of hydrogen. And clearly, considering that resource is critical and necessary in order to continue to grow this decarbonization challenge that we have ahead of us. So that's my first reaction when I was listening to the presentation.
Thank you, David. Lucas, what about you?
Yeah, thank you very much. So to give you a few words about Soitec, so our company has been founded some 30 years ago by CA-Leti researchers in Grenoble, in France. And we are today one of the world leaders in the design and development of innovative materials that we also call substrates for the semiconductor industry. And those semiconductor materials we produce are then used by our clients to design electronic circuits, basically, our clients being IDMs or foundries. And typically our substrates can be found in servers, data centers, autonomous driving systems, smartphones, tablets, connected watches, and so on and so forth. And so all this to say that we are quite upstream in the semiconductor value chain, which in my view is important to bear in mind in today's discussion, because and that's also making the link with a potential reaction to the study. But I think the Water Europe study emphasized that foundries typically are reported to consume significantly more water compared to other stages within the semiconductor value chain. So we are not foundries ourselves. Foundries are our clients. But it's true, and at Soitec we are fully aware of that for quite long, that yes, in our industries, water withdrawals are important, and we need definitely to objectify that, to provide scientific data on this phenomenon, to make sure that innovation can be well driven and that public policy decisions can be also well enlightened. So this great efforts to bring data on the table is really welcome. So that was, I mean, our initial reaction to the report.
Thank you, Lucas. Amanda.
Thank you. My name is Amanda Björksell, and I'm the chairperson of the Kopokosheka Working Party on Environment. And we are, as some of you might know, representing the farmers and agri-cooperatives within the European Union. And that means that our members, the farmers and cooperatives, are already very affected by climate change and the water issues, whether that is too much water or not enough water. So this report is really, we have it in a very good time, because we are already living this reality. And what I was actually looking at a number which I wrote down during the presentation, and that is that 1/3 of the EU territory is under water stress. And I think that is a very critical figure, quite alarming. And therefore, I'm also very thankful that you have presented this report. And in the report, I would also like to raise the parts of the cost of inaction and the investment gaps, because that's where we are right now. When within the agricultural sector, the water issues are a lot about investments and the investments gap, and that we for many years have not put enough efforts and money into these topics.
Thank you, Amanda. And if we continue with you, another important point in the report was around water technology. I mean, the study demonstrates that there needs to be large investments to support the sector, your sector, towards more efficient irrigation, water reuse, desalination. Are these the areas that your sector also identifies as key for future investments? Or there may be others? And how can Europe actually help the farmers in this journey?
I think that you have listed some very good or very important areas. I also want to stress that the water issue is affecting different parts of Europe quite differently. So where I live in Sweden, of course, we face another reality than our members in Spain. And that means that we also need quite different incentives and actions. But I think, climate adaptation and the need for irrigation and water reuse is really core. We face droughts and water scarcity more frequently. I think just the last summer and the last years can really show that this is an issue, especially in south of Europe. But we also have floods and risk of floods, and which means that we have to change our patents, it really affects the crops, but also infrastructure. And leading to that, I want to highlight the importance of investment in drainage also. We need to be able to handle these floods. So drainage is another thing that was not that clearly mentioned, which I want to raise. Then, of course, we have also efficiency gaps and problems with infrastructure, that parts of the irrigation systems which we are using now are outdated. And then we have parts of Europe that where we are not used to have irrigation, but where we need to increase it, which means that we face water losses due to outdated systems, but also that many farms actually lack the resources to invest in these technologies, and especially the farms on a smaller scale. So these are some of the biggest issues. Of course, we can also see some opportunities in working with these issues, because when we increase our water efficiency, we can also increase the harvests, and we can actually increase the value of our production systems. And then we need advanced technology, we need more precision agriculture, drip irrigation, for example, more efficient water use. Also, desalination is a good example of a quite high-tech investments which could really affect certain arid regions. I would also like to mention that there are some very interesting projects in wastewater management, and also the possibility to extract more nutrients from wastewater, which we could also use to increase circularity in agriculture, for example, phosphorus. And then, of course, we need to not only treat our water in a smarter way, we also need to adapt to other parts of agriculture. So plant breeding and, for example, the use of new genomic technologies to create more resistant crops is also a key to make more efficient water usage.
Thank you. Lucas, I'll turn to you with a similar question on water technologies, because in terms of semiconductors, the study highlighted the need also for the future to invest in water recycling technologies, advanced treatment facilities, and closed-loop systems in the fabrication process. What is your view, and do you have any examples from your company perspective or that you have seen in the sector?
Yep. So thank you for the question. No, it's true that, I mean, at the level of our industry, we have, almost contradicting challenges to reconcile in a way, because at some point, and this was mentioned during the introduction, I mean, all around the CHIPS Act, we have an ambition, to support the growth of the sector in Europe, underlined by, strategic autonomy and resilience issues, of course, part and parcel of a sustainable performance trajectory. And in a way, our industry is very demanding, because a bit like the data centers actually, but we need continuity, we need the security of supply, both actually in terms of water and energy. And actually, this industry is still growing quite fast with strong, ongoing relocalization dynamics. So this is not necessarily easy to reconcile, but at the level, I mean, I'm not a spokesperson, an official spokesperson of the European semiconductor industry here, but what I can say from what we see is that the industries operating in Europe have been taking this matter seriously in terms of water use and enhancing efficiency. So you can see significant investment in advanced water recycling and reuse technologies, in the implementation of closed loop water systems indeed, and employing sophisticated purification processes, and so on and so forth. Optimization also of the process, equipment upgrades that are taking place along the way. And if I take, for instance, our own example at Soitec, so it's been already 10 years since we implemented programs aimed at reducing our water withdrawals, aimed at recycling and increasing the proportion of recycled water used in our processes. And what's interesting actually is that it's providing quite quick results, if I can say. Typically, if I take between FY21 and FY23, we have managed, to reduce our overall water consumption per unit produced, so which is measured in our sector in liter per square centimeter of wafer, by 30%. And we are targeting between 2021 and 2030 an overall, 50% reduction. And typically, this is non-anecdotal, because so in the Grenoble area we have 4 fabs. Last of them has opened last year, and thanks to this reduction, we could launch our new fab without increasing your overall level of water consumption, and still below, of course, our regulatory requirements at local level. So that's the first thing. And also an important angle, and I think it was also mentioned in the study and in the introduction today, another angle for us relates to reusing what we call rinsing waters in our processes. And from this standpoint, our teams have really worked hard to launch earlier this year a first of its kind facility in Europe, which is a new industrial installation to allow wafer rinse water to be partially reused and reinjected in the production of ultra pure water for clean rooms, in our French manufacturing facilities. And all that is very complex, very time eating, very consuming also in terms of investment. It takes a lot of time. Typically, we needed, to complete analysis for all the waste from our clean room equipment to identify the right sources of reuse. So it took us more than 18 months to complete that, with tens of manufacturing stages and more than 100 equipments using ultra pure water, which needed to monitor to reach that goal. And this enabled us, to rise the wastewater reuse rate in our historical site from 20% in 2023 to over 35% in 2024. So really good news, because we can reach rapid results. We need to continue. So yeah, that's the few elements I wanted to share. Of course, it's a lot of technological challenge, financial challenges, and also challenges in terms of distribution between potable, non-potable water networks that we need when we think about upcoming innovations at our level to take into consideration. So it's also requiring a great deal of work, of course, at EU level, but it's also a lot about local specifics. So this is also an important message, I guess, for us, but potentially for other industries. The EU level, of course, matters, but it's a lot about local. So it's very difficult also to reflect upon a one size fits all approach in this context. We really need to adapt to our local ecosystem, local environment.
Thank you, Lucas. That was really a very, very good comments. David, I turn to you now on the water to finish on the water technology side, because also for hydrogen, we've seen that significant investments will be needed for more advanced water purification technologies, electrolyzer efficiency, and alternative cooling methods. Are you seeing these investments happening already with your company or in the sector, or do you need additional incentives for them to happen?
So I'm going to try and complement what's been said without repeating some of the points which are obviously relevant for any industry. First, I remember the word strategic autonomy, particularly pertinent naturally in the energy world. And so this autonomy requires to have the right mix of energies for different uses, and not only rely on one type of energy source, because this would limit our autonomy. And I think that's something which is quite well understood in the energy space. Hydrogen is one of the solutions that can be part of the energy mix. Typically, hydrogen is used where electrification cannot take place. So this is the energy intensive industries, and as well what we would call the heavy mobility. So examples of energy intensive would be refineries, metals, glass, and then heavy mobility is really everything except cars, where hydrogen can be part of a solution. And when we speak about hydrogen, there are many different types of hydrogen. Sometimes people refer to colors to describe hydrogen, and I'm going to oversimplify, but the source of energy to produce hydrogen sort of dictates more or less the color. from grey, which is made from methane, to blue, where there's a capturing of the CO2 and being stored, to pink, when the energy used is nuclear, and to green, when the energy used is what we would call renewable. Now, what we are seeing I think it's quite important to realize that this hydrogen economy has yet to be built. So it's not as if there's a market today, it's a market that is being developed. And obviously, incentives are helping to shape that incentive, not only in terms of production, but as well in terms of usage. And so what we're seeing over the overall geography is some countries where there is the good mix of incentives seems to go ahead a little bit faster than others. In the report, it's been very centered on the 10 million tons by 2030 for renewables. So I'm going to specifically mention a few points on renewable. The understanding of how to catalyze the hydrogen economy is still being, let's say, shared with the rest of within, let's say, the community. What we are actually realizing and starting to see is appetite for what I would call technology neutrality. So as we understand more and more hydrogen, there are different ways to produce hydrogen for renewable purposes. Clearly, electrolyzer are one, and that was one that was highlighted here in the report, with up to 20 metric tons of water per ton of hydrogen. But there can be other sources, such as, for instance, cracking of ammonia, that eventually leads to 10 to 60 times less water usage locally for the same amount of production of hydrogen. So are there a need for incentives? For sure. But I think as we get more and more familiar with the solutions, being open to different technologies is going to help drive this innovation and better manage this precious resource.
Thank you, David. That was really a very useful comment. Lucas, I know you have to leave shortly, so I have two questions for you, if you can address those before you have to leave, and then we continue with the other panelists. So one question is linked to water quality, because semiconductor production requires ultra pure water, which is a higher level than drinking water. And I was wondering whether you're following the developments in Europe on water quality in terms of legislation and the need to treat micropollutants from wastewater. PFAS, of course, is an issue. And does your company have a view on this issue of water quality in semiconductor production, and what needs to be the way forward?
Thanks for the question. So those are topics that we follow indeed, but I mean, as far as Soitec is concerned, we are actually quite lucky because, I mean, lucky in a way, but because regarding our main fabs, which are located again in the Grenoble area in France, no risky activity has been taking place upstream the river of Romanche, where we take the water from. No PFAS have been detected in this input water from us. And actually, this is not only a chance. I would say it's definitely because that's definitely a reason why, because this water is coming from the Alps, from the mountain. The quality of the water is very high, and this explains historically why Grenoble has been privileged already decades ago to develop the microelectronics cluster that exists over there today. And overall, even we withdraw less in this area than what was withdrawn some 20 years ago. So really taking the Soitec case precisely, we are lucky enough to have already pure water, quite pure input water, and so yeah, we are not primarily concerned by those aspects.
Thank you.
And what was the second question? Sorry.
So the second question, it's linked. Well, it's linked to climate change, but also more broadly. because you already addressed in your intervention that you've really taken good measures to address a little water use, let's say, at your facility. But of course, water scarcity is an issue across Europe. We've seen funds that are being given for semiconductor manufacturing in very water scarce areas like Dresden in Germany and Sicily. So my question is more linked to, okay, climate change, water scarcity, is this something that worries you beyond what you have done already in France? And are there any other challenges and opportunities you see from your perspectives in terms of the future of semiconductor production in Europe? And also you can address if you have any ideas or wish lists for policymakers at this stage.
Well, a lot of things. Okay. No, well, at our level, we are a mid-sized company, so 2,000 people today. So of course, we still have ambitions of expansions, but we are well rooted already in our Grenoble environment, and with respect, to perspectives around water scarcities and EU institutions or public authorities, providing funds. I mean, what I can say is that in a way, actually, we have not been waiting for public authorities to put stringent requirements to act. I mean, I was mentioning our innovations and in processes and so on, but even from a corporate perspective, for 2 to 3 years, 2 years already, we've been linking. I mean, it's an anecdote, but which is revealing something. We've been linking water efficiency to employee remuneration right up to the CEO level in the company, and I think we were the first company of the SBF 120, so the 120 largest French companies to do so. So yeah, there is no guarantee, but it gives you an idea of like the importance we attach to this subject, not only for current but also for future operations and in our overall strategic decision making process. So that's maybe for your first question, and for your second one, so more like of a conclusion. So maybe 3 points from my hands. So first one, but that I already touched upon during my introduction, it's need for more scientific data, and here your study is really contributing to this effort. As I was saying, it's all about local specifics, and it's a subject in terms of water consumption that is quick to unleash passions. So we need scientific hydrogeologic studies to support at local level, either industries or even public authorities, to debunk truths and falses and objectify the real levels of water stress locally, and especially at the light of climate change. Cost is of course an issue. So the fact of having available financing for costly infrastructure and capex around water management is an issue, and it can also create positive huge impacts, because for instance, at our level, we can be reflecting today on projects enabling potentially to reuse up to 70% of our withdrawals, but it comes really a strong cost. And last thing, and not the least, I would say, is around water management, we have a lot of intertwined issue, because I was talking about our efforts on reusing water, but actually the more we reuse, the more we concentrate our discharges, making it necessary to also invent specific treatments for those discharges, which is quite a challenge. So we really need to have an holistic approach on those aspects, otherwise we may just shift the water problem from one area to another. So yeah, that was maybe the last point I wanted to stress here.
Thank you, Lucas. I'll continue with you, Amanda, on the topic of water reuse, because this is one of the mentions as well in the study. And we know that the EU adopted a regulation on water reuse for irrigation purposes some years ago, but the uptake of it varies really between the member states. On the other hand, we are seeing countries like France adopting a national 10% target for water reuse across sectors in the future. What is your view on the uptake of reclaimed water for agriculture? Is this regulation from the EU enough? Do you need more action from the EU, or is it more at the national level?
Well, it's as you already stated in the question, it's a mix of the EU and the national regulations. So it's of course very important to discuss this topic of water reuse and the legal framework, but we can see a clear difference when it comes to this regulation. that there are some countries that have implemented this regulation, but we also have a number of countries that has not practiced this water use in their territories or in certain regions. So I think what we firstly have to do is to try to understand and to see why these countries have not implemented it, and see which hinder we have to actually implement this regulation. Of course, there are some aspects we see and some hinders that we could take a look at. Adoption barriers. So we have the costs of infrastructure. So many regions actually lack the necessary infrastructure for wastewater treatment, and also the distribution to farms. And it's quite heavy investments which we need to make, not only on farm level, but at municipal or regional level, quite expensive ones. So that is, of course, a big barrier. Then we have the administrative and technical burdens also relating to the farmers, who has to navigate these regulatory frameworks and requirements to actually use and adopt this reclaimed water. So that is actually an issue. And then, of course, we have the actual scope of this application of the regulation. So we know that the regulation primarily addresses the agricultural irrigation, but we don't look at the other agricultural uses of water, for example, livestock farming or groundwater recharge. And then it only applies to treated urban wastewater. So that kind of limits the flexibility in regions where we have other potential water resources. So in a sense, we also need to overlook this kind of regulation to make it easier to adopt to all regions. And talking about the regions, we also know that we have differences between the regions, and especially when it comes to the wastewater treatment facilities. So Northern and Western Europe maybe have invested more in these kind of facilities. So we also need to kind of leverage this base for investments. And of course, to support innovations in the area, because there is a lot of things happening now. And we also know that the legislation does not always move as quick as the innovations and the research. So I think we have also to be brave when it comes to the regulation and try to see how we can adopt these new technologies. But of course, there are barriers and we need to look at them, as you pointed out.
Thank you, Amanda. And David, now I turn to you on water reuse, because it is another topic that is mentioned for hydrogen production, and wastewater or industrial process water are two options mentioned in the study. But how do you see the policy framework? Because the water reuse regulation is not requesting industrial process water, for example, reuse. What are your views?
I don't know if I have a view on that as detailed as the previous speaker. And the reason for that is, again, the renewable hydrogen economy is still to be built. So you're mainly, I'm going to say, addressing permitting challenges, right? And sort of following what the permitting process allows you to do, or the speed at which you need to do that. As we were indicating, in some technologies, such as electrolysis, which is using water in its core, right, not just for cooling, being able to use different quality of waters will tend to be perhaps more centered on or will require less issues of regulation, but more in terms of technology, in terms of allowing electrolyzers to use a lower quality of water. But as maybe some of you may be familiar with, the electrolyzer technology is not completely stable yet, and the cost of that is still not where it was expected to be. However, reusing some of the wastewater for sure would be something that would be helpful. And anyhow, in some locations, we are already doing that, and being able to do that, and that having a regulation that enables you to do that, I think would clearly be beneficial. Absolutely. I think that's probably, I think it's not specific to the hydrogen sector, but it's really all around the industry, and opening up to other types of industries would be a very smart way to manage a smart water society.
Thank you, David. And if we continue with you before we go to the one question we have in the chat, I mean, here we are discussing, and primarily you have the water sector in this audience. And what we were wondering is actually, for hydrogen, there will be a lot of water needs in the future to meet all the targets that the EU has set. And partnership with the water sector, the water supply sanitation sector, will be critical in this respect. Are you seeing those partnerships and more collaboration happening already, or is it something that we need to forge a little bit more in the future?
I think it's still something where some effort needs to continue to be done, you know. Call it the energy sector, in which hydrogen would fall into, is already quite complex in itself to actually be able to manage the transition to a decarbonized solution. We have so many pieces of legislation, and then you have member states that translate them slightly differently. So having to spend time to understand that is very time consuming. And so adding the water element to that, what I'm trying to figure out is how we could do that without driving complexity, and at the same time being smart enough to allow Europe to be more competitive by offering innovations that are cutting edge in terms of renewable solutions, and at the same time helping to be, you know, very smart on how we're using the resources. You know, one of the interesting areas is that we've been repeating on this score, and everybody, I think, would know that water is a local issue. Doesn't make sense to speak about water globally. It's all very local where the need is, and the need tends to be different. Whereas energy is not a local issue. And so thinking through how you can manage to actually connect a global perspective with a local one is very helpful. And I think this is where that partnership needs to come in place.
Very useful. Amanda, from your side, I mean, there's also the question about collaboration with the water sector. I mean, you have climate change is one area where we could clearly see, you mentioned water losses and leakages of infrastructure to manage scarcity. There are floods. I mean, we need more nature-based solutions and optimization of infrastructure to manage those. So how do you see the collaboration evolving with the water sector?
I mean, there's a lot of areas to collaborate in, of course. I think before going more into this collaboration, I also want to stress that the water quality, we already mentioned it for the other sectors, but the water quality is really important for the agriculture. And there we also need to collaborate to improve this when it comes to reuse of water, for example, but also how our water bodies, like the status of our water bodies, because this affects our water, of course, biodiversity, the habitats, the ecosystems we work in. So that is an important topic where we all, like all sectors, actually have to collaborate. But looking at the actual management of the water resources, I think that we start this conversation is something very important, because we have looked at different sectors today. We all face different kinds of water challenges, but it's the same water resources we use, and we will compete for these water resources, and we will compete, that will just increase. So I think it's very good that we start to have this conversation with the water sector. Also remembering that Copa-Cogeca is an organization on EU level, and as David said now, also water issues are very much happening on a regional and local level, which means that our farmer unions and our cooperatives are also the actors that needs to be involved. And I really encourage all of you to talk to these organizations, because we as Copa-Cogeca are not doing the work on the ground. It's all of our members. So I think that we need to actually work on these national organizations and see how we can increase the dialogue on a national level. And then, of course, we need EU legislation that can relate to these conversations.
Thank you. Ilona, I would like to ask you to come on screen because we have one question for you. And the question is about the investment needs and the estimations that were made, and in particular, whether they're based on the OECD study from 2021, which is very useful, and is the study actually taking into account the new legislations, the revised drinking water directive, the revised urban wastewater directive? There's also climate mitigation measures. So can you explain what the investment needs include?
Absolutely. So it is absolutely a very good point. And indeed, the values of 255 billion are based on the OECD study, and which preceded the latest revision of the urban wastewater treatment directive in particular, and also drinking water directive. So it really needs to be taken as requiring at least 255 billion, and I think with the particular additional requirements for micropollutants, the sewage overflows, the individual sewage, individual wastewater treatment systems, the cost will only be the investment needs will be higher. So the study, that 255 billion was indeed based on OECD, but in practice it will be marginally larger if the revised drinking water directive and urban wastewater treatment directive requirements are added on top of it.
Thank you. And Amanda, there's one question that is there for you that came more to me as a direct message, so you don't see it in the chat, but there's a quick question before we conclude. How do you foresee the collaboration between farmers and food processing sector in improving the water impact of the value chain?
That is a good question. And I think the conversation is really going on in the different sectors, different kind of production. We're all trying to really use circular models. So I see that we can work, of course, to reduce or to be more water efficient. But I think another conversation which is really interesting is the water reuse, and on the input side, which kind of nutrients and fertilizer do we use? Can we reuse this also from the wastewater management? So looking at both these, both the input side and also more the food, the other parts of the food value chain, I think it's a very interesting conversation. What we know is that, of course, we can be more efficient, but agriculture will always be dependent on water and fresh water. I mean, we are managing animals and crops needing water, so we can never get down to zero, basically. So we'll need that kind of water. So it's also about prioritizing within the food value chain which kind of water we use where, and of course with quality of water we need for the primary production and the other parts of the value chain.
Thank you. And now I would like to ask you briefly for some quick concluding remarks. And David, I'll start with you. Just really any final remarks and any wish list for the policymakers, if you can, and Amanda afterwards.
So I'll go very quickly because we're over time now, but essentially driving or ensuring technology neutrality is essential to drive this innovation and really help us being competitive. So I think that's probably the first point. And I know the other one, which is something quite common, but helping to be coherent between any energy legislation and the water one as well. If I go in energy, there's very little of that water. I don't think I've ever seen one that actually includes water, to be even clearer. So finding this coherence will help us to be faster in implementing and progressing.
Thank you, Amanda.
Well, I can just echo the last part on that we need more coherence in the regulation. I think that's a very good point. I mean, it's a very complex topic, the water regulation. We have so many different kinds of directives and so on. So coherence within the water regulation, but also looking at more holistically at the sector. But then I also want to really stress that it's very welcome that our new commission actually have a Commissioner Rosvall, who will focus on water and the water resilience strategy. That is something very positive, and we're looking forward to the results of this, because we really need a coherent strategy for water resilient agriculture in more specific, but a water resilient strategy in general, where we can look at these financial resources. I think the point in the study about the investment gap could also bridge this kind of need for resources and investments needed. So I'm looking forward to the coming years and see how we can improve in the water management and be more strategic in how we tackle the water issue.
Thank you. I would really like to thank you so much for your interventions. We learned a lot today, and Ilona, to you for the presentation. Luik, I hand over to you to officially close this webinar.
Thank you a lot, Tanya. So I would like also to thank you all the participants who attend this meeting, and with a short delay in starting it, and also a big thank you to Amanda, Luca, David, Tanya, and Ilona for this webinar. It was very valuable, and just some key takeaway that I would like to bring also on your table. Water Europe issues this study to provide indeed data and to engage the debate on this aspect. One of the key data that I keep in mind is the 255 billion euro that we will need in the next 6 years if we want to comply with the EU legislation related to water. And the idea behind this study also was to take 4 strategic sectors for the European Union and to demonstrate the benefits in investing in water efficient technology and how it saves cost and energy. But also coming from this exchange, we can see that the spatial planning and the technology that we are putting on the table is really important. And partly we need to ensure that our laws are based on technology neutrality. It's something that is really important also for Water Europe community, and to make sure that the law fit for the next decade, and it's not a document that we will need to revise every 5 years. And also, I think it was important to stress that we had proactive sectors that we were speaking, or actors from these sectors today, demonstrating good example and some idea that can be disseminated. A last 2 points that I will also keep from my side, the importance of scientific data. We still miss some data and interoperability of the data, and also we need to continue to open up water reuse opportunities and going beyond wastewater reuse and the different options that we can have beyond irrigations. So with that, I thank you all. If you have further questions, do not hesitate to contact us. You have our email addresses on the website of Water Europe, and I all invite you to read the study. It's quite long, I know, 300 pages, but we will share later with all of you the infographic also who summarize the key data of these 4 sectors. So thank you all, and I hope to see you soon to debate more about water.
Thank you.